There are days when everything seems to fall apart at once. You wake up already tired. The phone lights up with a message you did not want to read. A plan you carefully prepared quietly collapses. Someone you trusted disappoints you without warning. And you sit there in the small silence of the morning, staring at the wall, wondering how so much weight can press down on one ordinary day. I know that moment, the heaviness in the chest, the tight jaw, the strange stillness where you do not even have the strength to react anymore. You are not dramatic. You are not weak. You are simply exhausted from holding yourself together while everything around you feels unstable. Have you ever smiled in front of others while something inside you was quietly breaking? Have you ever told yourself, "It's fine," when it clearly was not? Have you ever laid awake at night, replaying what went wrong, asking why it all had to happen at once? There is a particular kind of pain in watching things slip beyond your control. The job, the relationship, the health of someone you love, the future you thought was certain. It feels unfair. It feels personal. And sometimes it feels like the world is testing how much you can endure before you finally collapse. But notice something subtle. In the middle of the chaos, there is still a small space inside you that observes, a quiet witness. Even when your thoughts are loud and your emotions are sharp, there is a deeper part of you that remains still. It does not scream. It does not panic. It simply watches. Most people never turn toward that space. They run from it. They drown it out with noise, with anger, with blame. And for a while, that distraction feels easier than sitting with the storm. Yet what if calm is not the absence of collapse, but the way you stand when collapse comes? What if strength is not about preventing things from falling apart, but about refusing to fall apart with them? What if the world can shake and something within you can remain steady? I am not speaking of coldness. I am not speaking of pretending you do not feel. I am speaking of a quiet steadiness that grows slowly, often in the darkest seasons. A steadiness that does not deny pain, but does not surrender to it either. If you have been carrying more than you show, if you are tired of reacting to every blow, if you long for a way to stay grounded while everything shifts around you, then stay with me. In the next part, we will begin to gently uncover how that inner steadiness is built and how it can remain even when the world does not. When someone hurts us, the first instinct is to believe that something is wrong with us. We look inward and search for a flaw. Maybe I was not enough. Maybe I spoke poorly. Maybe I deserved it. The mind moves quickly in that direction because it feels personal. Pain feels personal. But if we slow down, if we step back just a little, a different picture begins to appear. Most people act from the limits of their own understanding. They speak from their fears. They react from old wounds they have never examined. They defend themselves against threats that may not even exist. In that state, their words and actions are not carefully measured truths about you. They are expressions of their own inner confusion. When a father raises his voice at his child after a long day, is it always about the child? Or is it the weight he carries from work, the pressure he does not know how to release, the frustration he was never taught to process? When a friend withdraws without explanation, is it always rejection? Or could it be their own insecurity, their own quiet battle with feeling inadequate? When a stranger speaks harshly in public, is it a reflection of your worth? Or is it their impatience, their stress, their narrow view of the world in that moment? According to the Stoic way of seeing things, human beings do not act out of evil intention as often as we imagine. They act out of what they believe is right, necessary, or protective at that time. Even harmful behavior usually grows from distorted judgments. A person who humiliates another may believe dominance keeps them safe. A person who lies may believe honesty would cost them love. A person who criticizes constantly may believe perfection is the only path to acceptance. Their behavior reveals their perception. It reveals how they interpret events, how they define threat, how they measure value. It does not define your essence, yet we confuse the two. When someone dismisses us, we hear, "You are insignificant." When someone betrays us, we hear, "You are unworthy." When someone misunderstands us, we hear, "You are flawed." We absorb their reaction as if it were a final verdict on our character. But what if it is only a mirror of their inner world? Imagine standing in front of a distorted mirror at a carnival. Your reflection appears stretched or shrunken. You would not panic and attempt to reshape your body to match it. You would understand that the mirror itself bends the image. In the same way, people project their fears, beliefs, and unresolved pain onto others. The image they throw at you may be warped, yet we often accept it as truth. This does not excuse harmful behavior. It does not mean you should tolerate disrespect or remain in damaging environments. It simply shifts the center of gravity. Instead of asking, "What is wrong with me?" you begin to ask, "What belief is driving their action?" That question creates space, and in that space, there is less immediate self-blame. In families, misunderstandings often pass from one generation to another. Parents repeat patterns they once suffered under. In friendships, jealousy can quietly poison sincerity. In society, competition makes people compare and diminish others to feel secure. These patterns are human, imperfect, often unconscious. When you see this clearly, something inside softens. Not into weakness, but into perspective. You begin to realize that another person's anger is often their struggle speaking loudly. Their coldness may be their fear. Their cruelty may be their ignorance. None of these automatically measure your value. And still, even with this understanding, even when you tell yourself that their behavior reflects their perception, the pain does not disappear immediately. The body still tightens. The heart still aches. The memory still lingers. If their actions are not a true measure of us, if we can see that clearly with reason, then why do we still hurt? We say it was their words that hurt us, their betrayal, their indifference. And yes, those things cut deeply. But if we sit quietly and look a little longer, we begin to see that the wound is not made only of what they did. It is also shaped by what we hoped for. Pain grows in the space between expectation and reality. You expected to be understood. You expected loyalty. You expected fairness. Maybe you did not even say it out loud. Maybe you told yourself you were not expecting anything at all, but somewhere inside, There was an image, a silent agreement in your mind about how things should unfold, and when life did not follow that image, something inside you cracked. We attach ourselves not only to people, but to outcomes, to the version of the future we rehearsed in our thoughts, to the way someone was supposed to treat us, to the belief that if we gave enough, we would receive enough in return. When that invisible contract is broken, the pain feels sharp, not only because of what happened, but because of what did not happen. There is also the quiet hunger to be recognized, to be seen accurately, to have someone say, "I understand you, I value you," when instead we are dismissed, misunderstood, or replaced. It touches something very old within us, a fear that perhaps we are not enough, a fear that perhaps we are invisible. That fear does not begin in adulthood. It begins much earlier, in childhood moments when approval felt like safety, in classrooms where praise felt like proof of worth, in relationships where love felt conditional. We learn slowly and unconsciously to measure ourselves through the reactions of others. So when someone wounds us, it is rarely just about that single event. It awakens layers. It reopens earlier questions we never fully resolved. Am I valued? Am I secure? Am I chosen? This is why the pain can feel disproportionate. Outsiders may look at the situation and say, "It was only a comment. It was only a disagreement." But inside you, it was not small. It pressed against something fragile and unfinished. The Stoic spirit does not ask you to deny this. It does not demand that you become stone. To feel hurt is human. To feel disappointment is natural. The heart reacts before the mind can interpret. That is not weakness. It is simply how we are built. What matters is what happens next. Emotion rises like a wave, fast, intense, sometimes overwhelming. The Stoic path does not attempt to freeze the ocean. It does not command the wave to disappear. It simply refuses to hand over the steering wheel to the storm. There is a difference between feeling anger and becoming anger, between feeling rejection and defining yourself by rejection, between experiencing sadness and constructing an identity around it. Often our suffering deepens because we follow the first emotion wherever it leads. A sharp comment becomes a long internal story. A single betrayal becomes proof that no one can be trusted. A moment of neglect becomes a permanent narrative about our worth. We suffer not only from what happened, but from the meanings we attach to it. And attachment is subtle. We cling to being right. We cling to being appreciated. We cling to being treated fairly. When reality refuses to cooperate, we resist. And that resistance tightens the pain. Imagine holding a rope in a silent tug-of-war with reality. The harder you pull, the more your hands burn. Yet reality does not move. It simply is. The Stoic insight is not to drop your humanity. It is to notice the rope in your hands. Tonight, if you listen closely to your own hurt, you may hear beneath it a quiet longing, a longing to be affirmed, to be secure, to be certain. And perhaps the question is not how to stop feeling, but how to stand beside your feelings without letting them carry you away. The night is quiet now. The mind is still moving, but slower. And somewhere within that stillness, there is space forming, space between you and the storm. In the next part, we will step gently in what can be done within that space. Now we move gently into practice, not as a strict discipline, not as a rigid formula, but as a way of standing differently in the middle of real life. Imagine you are sitting at the dinner table. A family member makes a comment that feels dismissive. The room goes quiet for a second. You feel the familiar heat rising in your chest. In that small pause, there is a choice. The Stoic principle begins there, between what happens and what you do next. The first practice is to separate the event from your interpretation. The comment itself is sound, words arranged in a certain way. Your mind quickly adds meaning. They do not respect me. They always undermine me. The meaning feels automatic, but it is still an addition. When you notice this distinction, even briefly, something shifts. You are no longer completely fused with the reaction. You are observing it. That observation is already a form of inner control. Another situation. A close friend stops replying to your messages. Hours pass, then days. The mind begins constructing explanations. Perhaps they are tired of you. Perhaps you said something wrong. The Stoic approach does not deny the discomfort. It simply asks you to return to what is actually within reach. You cannot command their response. You cannot enter their thoughts. What you can guide is your own conduct. You can choose patience instead of accusation. You can decide not to punish yourself with imagined stories. You remain responsible for your tone, your clarity, your steadiness. Their silence belongs to them. Your response belongs to you. There is also the moment when your effort goes unnoticed. You work carefully on a project. You give your best, and someone else receives the recognition. The impulse is to correct the injustice immediately, to argue, to demand acknowledgement. Sometimes speaking up is appropriate, but before acting, the Stoic principle asks a quieter question. Did I act according to my standards? Was my effort sincere? If the answer is yes, then your integrity is intact. Recognition is external. It moves according to many forces beyond your direction. Your character, however, is shaped by repeated choices. That is something you can return to again and again. In public spaces, perhaps a stranger speaks sharply. The words are brief but cutting. Instead of absorbing them as a verdict, you remind yourself that you are encountering a moment in their day, not the total truth of your worth. Their tone may be influenced by pressures you cannot see. You do not need to correct their mood to preserve your balance. You only need to govern your own. This is not about becoming passive. It is about conserving energy. Each time you attempt to control another person's perception, reaction, or behavior, you step into unstable ground. You tie your inner weather to external winds. The Stoic practice gently unties that knot. It brings attention back to what is steady. Your judgments, your intentions, your actions. There is also the practice of measured response. When emotion surges, allow it space without allowing it command. You might excuse yourself from the room for a moment. You might delay a message you feel compelled to send immediately. You create distance not to suppress feeling, but to prevent it from deciding for you. In that pause, clarity often returns naturally. Over time, this way of living becomes less dramatic than it sounds. It is quiet, repeated, almost ordinary. You begin to notice that many conflicts lose intensity when you stop feeding them with reflex. You begin to sense that your peace does not have to rise and fall with every opinion directed at you. The world remains unpredictable. People remain imperfect. Situations remain uncertain. Yet inside, there is a growing stability. Not because you have controlled them, but because you have learned to guide yourself. And in that guidance, there is a subtle lightness. The shoulders are not as tense. The mind is not as crowded. You respond when needed. You remain still when stillness is wiser. Nothing dramatic has changed outside, but something steady has formed within. And that steadiness feels quietly like relief. There comes a point in life when the desire to win begins to feel heavy, not because victory is wrong, not because strength is unnecessary, but because constant comparison slowly exhausts the spirit. You argue, you defend, you prove, you correct, and even when you succeed, even when you silence the other person, something inside remains restless. Winning against someone often feeds the surface of the ego. It gives a brief sense of elevation, a small surge of satisfaction. But it rarely brings quiet. To defeat another person in conversation, to outshine them in status, to have the final word in conflict. These are outer triumphs. They depend on witnesses. They depend on recognition. They depend on someone else standing lower so that you may appear higher. Inner peace does not operate that way. The Stoic spirit does not compete for dominance because it understands something simple and difficult at the same time. Another person's defeat does not guarantee your freedom. You can win the argument and still lose your calm. You can prove your point and still carry anger long after the conversation ends. You can be right, completely right, and yet feel disturbed for hours. What kind of victory is that? There is a subtle difference between strength and conquest. Conquest needs resistance. It needs an opponent. Strength can exist alone. It does not require applause. It does not require comparison. It is measured quietly in how steady your mind remains when challenged. When someone insults you and you restrain the impulse to retaliate immediately, no one may applaud that moment. There is no visible trophy, yet something profound has occurred. You have chosen not to hand your inner state over to another person's mood. That choice is invisible, but it is powerful. To win over others often means to control their perception, to bend the situation in your favor, to shape the outcome according to your preference. To keep your mind at peace means something else entirely. It means you are not enslaved by the need to dominate the outcome. It means you are not compelled to chase validation. It means you can step back without feeling diminished. There is maturity in recognizing that not every misunderstanding requires correction. Not every criticism requires defense. Not every conflict deserves your full energy. Sometimes the greatest dignity is silence. Not silence born from fear. Not silence forced by weakness, but silence chosen because your peace is worth more than proving a point. This does not mean indifference. It does not mean passivity. It means clarity about what truly matters. If protecting your calm requires letting someone believe they have won, then perhaps that is not a loss at all. Perhaps it is a quiet exchange. You give them the illusion of victory, and you keep your equilibrium. Over time, this shift changes how you walk through the world. You no longer measure your worth by how often you prevail over others. You measure it by how little you are shaken. You begin to sense a freedom that does not depend on applause or agreement. Freedom is not the power to control people. It is the ability to remain centered when you cannot. And when you stop trying to win every battle, something loosens inside you. The shoulders drop, the breath deepens, conversations become lighter. You listen more, you react less. You move through conflict as someone who does not need to conquer in order to feel secure. This is not weakness. It is refinement. A person who must always win is still chained to the opinions of others. A person who can walk away calmly has already stepped beyond that chain. In the end, life is not an arena where every encounter demands a victor. It is more like a long road at dusk. Some travelers shout as they pass. Some try to race you. Some challenge your direction. You do not need to outrun them. You do not need to silence them. You simply continue walking. And as the light softens on the horizon, you realize that the real victory was never over them. It was the quiet steadiness with which you kept moving forward, leaving the noise behind, following your own path into the widening glow ahead. By now, the noise has softened, not because the world became quieter, but because something within you did. The Stoic spirit was never loud. It does not demand attention. It does not rush to defend itself. It stands, and it watches. There will still be misunderstandings. There will still be sharp words. There will still be moments when the heart tightens without warning. This path does not erase them. It changes how you meet them. Instead of reaching outward to correct every disturbance, you begin to turn inward, not to hide, but to anchor. You notice your thoughts as they form. You see how quickly meaning attaches itself to events. You feel the first surge of emotion, and you remain present long enough to choose. Not perfectly, not every time, but more often than before. This is how steadiness grows, quietly, almost invisibly. You stop trying to rearrange people. You stop rehearsing arguments in your mind long after they have ended. You stop chasing validation like air. And in that stopping, there is space. Space to breathe. Space to respond rather than react. Space to let another person remain imperfect without it becoming your burden. There is a certain maturity in accepting that life will not align itself with your preferences. Plans will change. People will disappoint. You will disappoint yourself at times. Yet beneath all of that movement, there can be something firm, not rigid, firm. A center that does not collapse each time the outer structure shakes. The Stoic way is not about suppressing tears. It is not about pretending you are untouched. It is about understanding that feeling is natural, but surrender is optional. You may feel anger, but you do not become it. You may feel sadness, but you do not build your identity around it. You may feel loss, but you do not allow it to define the entirety of your story. Little by little, you begin to trust your own inner ground more than the shifting terrain outside. You realize that control was never about other people. It was never about securing outcomes. It was about guiding your own judgments, guarding your own mind, returning again and again to what is truly yours. And something subtle happens when you live this way. Conflicts lose their urgency. Praise loses its intoxication. Insults lose their sting more quickly. You move through the same world, but with less friction. There is a softness in that strength. You listen more. You speak with fewer unnecessary words. You allow silence to exist without rushing to fill it. You let others misunderstand you if clarification would cost your peace. This is not indifference. It is proportion. Life remains complex, but you are no longer tangled in every thread. When everything falls apart, you may still feel the tremor, but you do not fall with it. You stand, you breathe, you wait, and often. That is enough. The Stoic spirit does not promise a life without storms. It offers something quieter, a way to walk through wind without losing your direction. In the end, nothing dramatic announces this transformation. There is no ceremony, no applause, just a person who reacts a little less, who understands a little more, who carries their own mind with care. When the video ends, the world will still be waiting. The same people, the same uncertainties. But perhaps you will meet them differently. Not hardened, not withdrawn, simply steady. And in that steadiness, there is a quiet freedom, the kind that does not need to be seen to be real, the kind that stays with you when the room is empty and the night is still, the kind that whispers even when no one else is speaking. You are responsible for your mind.